What's up, guys? It's Ian here, back with another video today. Once again, thank you for tuning in. Yeah, let's get into it. So, the first question is, what is the fat acceptance movement and what are your views on it? So, I just looked up the textbook definition because I don't want to get this wrong, so I'll just read it here. The fat acceptance movement is a social movement seeking to change anti-fat bias in social attitudes by raising awareness among the general public about the obstacles faced by fat people. Areas of contention include the aesthetic, legal, and medical approaches to people whose bodies are fatter than the social norm. Okay, so let's get into my views on it now that we have the definition laid out. So my views on it are, I think being of an advanced body weight, while it correlates to certain health issues such as increased levels of triglycerides in the blood, potentially increased stress on the heart and blood vessels, it doesn't necessarily mean causation. So a person could be over fat but still have relatively healthy blood work and a healthy heart, based on how the fat is distributed. So I touched on this in a previous video. You could have two individuals of the same body fat percentage, but essentially they would have different disease risk because of just differences in their individual physiology and how their body copes with the increased body fat. So yeah, I don't think we should value people any less or any differently for being in less good of shape. So those are overall my views. I think there's correlation but not causation. It is possible to be very healthy and live a very long time at an increased body fat percentage, and being lean doesn't necessarily mean you're going to live forever. I may have touched on this before also, but we see a J-shaped curve with exercise and mortality. What that means is that you can't just exercise more and more and live an unlimited time span. If that was the case, then professional athletes would live longer than anybody, but that's simply not the case. We see professional athletes, especially athletes where the aerobic demands are intense, they suffer from large amounts of oxidative stress, and they die sooner than their moderately exercising counterparts, right? So, pardon me. Yeah, there's a J-shaped curve with exercise and mortality. If you want to be the best of the best as an athlete, you're not going to live as long as somebody who's exercising a moderate amount on average, right? And once again, that's not an absolute. We have professional athletes who live very long time, but on average, training like an athlete does take a toll on your body. And as I coach my clients, I tell them, if you want to be as healthy as possible, live as long as possible, you want to exercise a moderate amount, not an extreme amount, all right? People like, myself, who are like a habitual exerciser, I do it because I enjoy it. I want to see if I can reach like that peak level of performance at some point. And I've coached and interacted with a lot of people who feel the same way, but I try to be transparent and present the facts as I know them. You don't just get to live forever if you exercise super hard. Conversely, if you never exercise, that probably does predispose you to greater health risk. But regardless of all the health risks and correlations between exercising excessively or not at all, I think a moderate amount is probably ideal for health and longevity. And, we shouldn't disparage people or look down on people because they choose not to exercise, because, there is a certain culture involved with going to the gym and exercising, and it can be very intimidating for people who aren't used to it to get into that overall environment. And, I've coached a lot of individuals who are of advanced body weight, and I try to be very welcoming. I touched on some tactics that I like to use, focusing on external resistance whenever possible, avoiding any exercises that would lessen their feeling of competency. I've found that when you take people of that, advanced body size and you get them into lifting, the different powerlifting movements, they might be able to lift like a lot on, their first month in the gym. Like, a lot of these people are very strong in terms of their ability to lift weights. So, it's all about finding something that a person is good at and developing that feeling of self-efficacy and making them feel better about themselves. And that's likely to increase the chances that they'll make it more of a habit and continue to exercise a moderate amount throughout their entire life. And that's really the goal that we're going for there. All right. The next question kind of ties into the first question. Should the fat acceptance movement be more extended towards men? And this is a touchy question, right? So, I think traditionally the fat acceptance movement is mostly geared towards women. You don't see a lot of men included in the fat acceptance movement, which is controversial. And I think yes and no. So this is complicated, right? To get into it, we have to touch back on something that I addressed in one of my previous question and answer videos. Centric adiposity versus appendicular adiposity, and different health risk on average by, your biological sex, right? So we talked before about how two individuals at the same body fat percentage, they have different disease risks both based on their own individual physiology and based on how they distribute fat throughout the body. So an individual with centric adiposity stores all their fat around the midsection, around the organs. They're going to have a higher disease risk than somebody of the same body fat percentage that stores their fat more around the hips and the arms and legs and, under their skin, but not as much around the midsection. Men are predisposed towards centric adiposity. So you could argue that, and this has nothing to do with a person's worth or value as a person, right? I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that I think we should accept people however they are and not treat them any differently. But I think since men on average do trend towards more centric adiposity when they do gain body fat, men at a higher body fat percentage are going to have a higher disease risk than women at the same body fat percentage, because women naturally tend to store more fat around their hips and arms and legs, right? So if you take, there's just 100 men, 100 women of their biological sex, and at both advanced body size, high body fat percentages, the men are essentially going to be predisposed to greater disease risk, since more of them on average are going to store more body fat around the midsection. And again, I want to be super clear, this has nothing to do with their worth or value as a person. I think we should value all people regardless of their body fat percentage or their ability to perform at any sport, because everybody's better at different things. So yeah, that was complicated, but I think there are some differences between disease risk by biological sex at the same body fat percentage. So yeah, hopefully that clears that up there. I wanted to touch on differences in NEAT, ambient temperature, and intestinal fauna. So these are all differences that, let's say you take 1,000 people and feed them all the same amount of calories. These are some factors that I could see presenting ability to have somewhat of a significant difference in outcome of body composition if you give people the same exercise and calorie regimen. All right, so exercising a vigorous resistance training session could burn anywhere from like 100 calories to maybe a couple hundred calories if you spend a decent amount of time in the gym and you're going hard and stuff like that. So it doesn't really burn that many calories. We can see that essentially being at the gym or exercising, yeah, if you're riding your bike for like 5 hours, then sure, you're gonna burn maybe like several hundred calories or like 1,000 calories, right? But maybe, and if you're racing, even more than that. But let's just say the average person exercising, they're not burning that many calories. And if we have them all eat the same amount, these are some big differences. These are going to be some factors that create a big difference in how much energy is burned. So NEAT refers to non-exercise activity thermogenesis. How much do you fidget and gesticulate? How much do you move your hands when you talk? Do you move your head around a lot? Like how much basically do you move around in your minute-to-minute life? Just like, are you reaching for your phone, for your water bottle, things like that? This is probably going to add up to a greater daily, weekly, and yearly calorie difference in your net energy balance than just exercising, for an hour a day. Your NEAT accounts for more energy usage than a short exercise session of moderate intensity. Now, the short exercise session of moderate intensity, it has other benefits. You're gaining muscle mass, you're able to affect your insulin resistance, a lot of different things, right? But NEAT does create a significant difference, and I generally find that the more you're in a calorie deficit, your NEAT goes down. If you're in a calorie surplus or consuming a lot of caffeine, you're going to be able to have a much higher NEAT. All right, ambient temperature. This is a short one. If you're in a really cold environment, you're probably going to have to use a lot more energy to keep yourself warm, right? If you're in a really hot environment, you may also have to use more energy to keep yourself warm. So a moderate environment is probably going to be the most conducive to weight gain. If you hold your calories consistent, I'd say a moderate to a higher temperature, you're not going to have to use as many calories to maintain your body temperature. If you're shivering all the time, or if it's cold, you're just not dressed warmly enough, like me right now, I'm using potentially a lot of energy just to maintain my body temperature. So that touches on ambient temperature. This third point, intestinal fauna, this is kind of an emerging area of study. I think this is still not super scientifically grounded. I remember back when I was in college, a couple of the students were studying this as their thesis project, and essentially a breakdown of how I would explain it in layman's terms is if you feed a bunch of different people the same amount of calories, there may be slight differences in absorption rates of the calories. So based on an individual's intestinal fauna, basically the bacteria within your digestive tract, you're going to be able to absorb different amounts of energy from the same amount of food consumed. And that's pretty complicated. It would be hard to study this because in order to study it accurately, you'd have to find a bunch of subjects who are willing to live in a metabolic ward. And essentially a metabolic ward is a room that's surrounded with a layer of fluid. And the metabolic ward is essentially able to determine exactly how much energy a person is using. And you're feeding them, really specific portions, having them live in a metabolic ward for a certain period of time, voluntarily, of course. I guess you could get prisoners. Anyway, so let's not talk about that. But yeah, so this is an emerging area of research. Maybe having different types of intestinal fauna could allow individuals to absorb nutrients differently. And throughout most of human history, food scarcity was somewhat rampant. We've only recently had, in developed countries, unlimited access to food, or if you have enough money, relatively unrestricted access to food. So those are three factors that could be important in regulating, body fat percentage. overall. I think each of them could be gone more in depth and deserve their own video. I got a future video on autophagy coming soon. I've been getting some requests about that. I've still been learning more and trying to solidify my thoughts on it. I'm going to drop some diagrams and try to teach you all a bit about that. Alright, so if you made it this far, it's kind of a long video, some touchy subjects covered. Hopefully I didn't offend too many people, and thank you for watching. Make sure you like the video, subscribe, share it with some friends if you found it useful, and I'll see you soon.